doing DeFi, greatest in the world, and they finally about to see why. What you know about XRD? I'm smart money, I ain't never on a decline. What you know about NFTs? It's not just Ace, when you finally gonna realize you need scalability, need more utility, then you better call on these guys. I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline, building the future, I feel like a savage.
Hello and welcome. I am Piers Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, The DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the assets, projects, and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I am joined by Justin, Chief Herder at Pangolin. Pangolin is a multi-chain DEX, decentralized exchange, in the multiverse. Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Piers. Pleasure to be here.
So you're calling in from Australia, right?
I am indeed from the sunny Gold Coast.
So you guys, you're having to do some fairly decent traveling every time you go anywhere for crypto. It must annoy you that a lot of crypto ends up in the US.
That's it. I think I just got back from a 40-hour flight last Friday. 40 hours, yeah. But it is what it is. That's crypto, right?
So Pangolin, you guys started out as an Avalanche DEX, right? And it's got an interesting history. I'd love you to talk a little bit about how you came to be chief herder at Pangolin.
Yeah, sure. So Pangolin, so when Avalanche was launching, so Avalanche launched their mainnet around February of 2021, and they needed a DEX, right? So without a DEX, it's very hard for any real economic activity to occur on chain. So Avalabs bootstrapped Pangolin with a single developer called Connor, and they launched it. And then what happened was, over the course of 3 months, they kind of didn't really have the resources internally to run it. They were obviously launching a new chain with all that goes about it. And, Pangolin was launched as a completely community-owned DEX. So what that meant was 95% of the tokens went to the community, or has gone to the community, and 5% was allocated across an airdrop. So there was no VC funding, no insider funds, no team allocation, no any allocation. So completely community distributed. So what happened was they needed a community team to take over. So what happened was, in about May, I think, I'd been contributing, to the project. I'd been, doing a little bit of, pull requests on GitHub, obviously communicating with the team, writing blog posts, getting involved in the community. And at that point, Avalabs was like, okay, would you be interested in, taking over the community or the project? And at that stage, we kind of went through the voting, so canvassing for votes, because PNG is actually a governance token. I know that's rare in DeFi. Maybe
OG governance token for the win. Actual votes that actually do something.
Exactly.
How novel.
I know, right? We put through a vote. So first of all, we had canvas. We had to get 1 million PNG in order to submit the vote. So, you kind of have to canvas and get a few people behind you.
Right.
And then we put through a vote to take over. And in July, I think, or June, we were voted in. So myself and then 2 other members of the community to help out with the running of the things. And then the 3 of us kind of came into the position from there. And then built it out from there.
That's really cool. So basically you got voted in by the Pangolin community, which is essentially the Avalanche community, a very, very close overlap between the two. How have you found that experience? What would you say what are the things that have been interesting? And just for context for people who haven't heard of Pangolin, right? You guys have currently you've done about $16 billion worth of volume. You've got about $37 million worth of total liquidity at the moment. There's sort of various places that you can earn fees of up to 116% per annum of what you put in. So you're a relatively decent DEX. You're absolute kudos for that. That's a huge achievement. What have you learned along the way? Because that's a really unusual way of building a DeFi project?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the amount of learnings is crazy. So I think the thing is, most governance tokens and all of this stuff, they're kind of like smoke and mirrors to get rid of regulators. Whereas like we kind of like came into this, project where governance was everything. So what happens in a project like that, or a decentralized, a DAO, is that there's no clear boundaries about what's to be voted on. So do I have autonomy to make this decision? Can I do this? Can I hire someone? So what falls within the boundaries of what the community votes upon, and where does that autonomy rest with the team? So what that means is actually you become like this committee almost, and then it's very hard to do things. So ultimately, decentralized governance and all of these concepts are very good, but you need to have a healthy balance so that you can actually do things. So that was one of the hardest things is, especially, I always compare it to Plato's ship, right? Like in Plato, he talks about having a ship, and you got the captain, and you got the chef, and you got the navigator, and you got all these dudes, but the chef's not like all of a sudden steering the ship and going, well. But in DeFi, the chef thinks he's like the navigator, and he's like shouting loud on Twitter about like how you pointed the wrong way. So that can be quite challenging, right? Because it's like, okay, well, you voted me in, but then like there's no trust factor, and like you got to build that trust,
right?
Which is a good thing, right? Because you want to be a representative, and you want to do the community. You want to be solid to the community. But again, it's that pragmatic. That you got to be pragmatic. So that was very, very challenging. Yeah.
No, I mean, I can imagine it was incredibly difficult. I'm sure it continues to be difficult. Do you think so? Obviously, when Pangolin launched, you guys were the first DEX on Avalanche. Since Pangolin launched, there has been other competition that's come along. How have you, like, how much would you say that difficulty of getting things done has affected your ability to be sort of like competitive in the early days, or would you say that they're two different things?
I mean, it's a multifaceted reason. So like, Trader Joe is obviously the number one DEX on Avalanche. So if I look at, so I mean, there's a lot of ways you look at it, right? So like, I mean, ultimately what happens in the short term, to quote Buffett, the markets are like, it's a popularity contest in a lot of ways, and then over the long term, it's a waiting machine, right? So when Trader Joe came, so what happened with us was we also inherited like a lot of technical debt. So tokenomics, so we inherited tokenomics that were 28 years.
Right.
We also inherited smart contracts that were quite rigid. So the original smart contract developer was very safety conscious, which is a great thing. But it didn't allow us a lot of flexibility in terms of things. So when you do that, you spend a lot of time fixing that technical debt. So I'd say there were a few reasons for why Pangolin kind of and Trader Joe, kind of went on different paths. First of all, we had to fix the technical debt. Second of all, I think Trader Joe had a great job at marketing. I mean, they built their name on creating kind of like a smear campaign, and that kind of like works really well in an industry that is so fervent and kind of, in DeFi is pretty maximalist, right?
Yeah,
so like
and it also likes a gossip. I think the entire industry loves a gossip. So like the way in which bad news spreads. I think there's also like a more serious aspect of that, which is that when your money is constantly being hacked, right? When you see hacks happening all of the time in crypto, we've had $2 billion worth of hacks, $2.5 billion worth of hacks in 2022. In DeFi, people are like super sensitive about any bad news, any like rumor that comes across, they'll pass it on just in case. And so I think there's this like dual facet thing, which is like everyone in crypto likes a gossip. Plus, if there's bad news, it will get passed on even if it's not verified, because people are worried that their money might not be safe.
exactly right. So there was a multitude of reasons, for that. Ultimately the thing is, it depends on the vision. Like, so Trader Joe is obviously, a single DEX on Avalanche. Like that's clear to their kind of, whereas like, a big part of Pangolin was always not to be maximalist, not to be kind of like, rooted in this. Like, there's so much innovation within the space, like, I mean, you don't want to be disparaging to anyone, but like the thing is, we want to go where the innovation is. And, and I don't think you can say, Avalanche consensus is great. We know that, I mean, Radix has great things, Sui and Move has great things. Like, I think it's a big part of our identity and those growing pains of us as a DEX and as a team, that, it allowed us to have a bit more of an open mind to what's out there, which I think is actually, a benefit. And again, like from when we came in, we said, we're here for 5, 10 years, 20 years. Like we're looking on much longer time horizons. So in DeFi, it's very immediate, right? Like, oh, were you first? Yeah, were you first? Yeah. And then everyone in the community blows up. Like they got the first pool. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But like, our timelines are slightly different.
So what is the long-term Pangolin multi-chain like vision? Like where is this going?
It's to make centralized exchanges obsolete. You shouldn't have to go to a centralized exchange for anything.
And that is that just what people imagine a DEX to be today, or do you think of a DEX as being as in most people think of a DEX as a place in which I can exchange one financial asset for another financial asset, and both of those assets would be obviously financial, right? So Ethereum for wrapped Bitcoin or something like that, right? Do you see the role of the DEX being broader than just that, or is it just going, we don't need these centralized institutions to do these things, we can do them all via smart contract, let's just build the best way of doing that?
Yeah. So I think, so ultimately when you go, like I look at Binance, when you go to Binance, you don't actually care which chain you're on. You want to buy X token. Right. And then in the background, Binance kind of abstracts that away from you. So I think that's critical, right? The user they don't care. Most of them, they're like, maybe someone in the pub gave them a tip and they want to buy, whatever their token is. And they don't want to then have to like go through this convoluted process. Oh, I've got to get MetaMask. Oh, I've got to add this chain. Oh, I've got to get this weird wallet because it's on this like other blockchain. Like all of that stuff should be abstracted away. And the user should just be like, okay, well, I want to buy this and this is how. So I think that's key. And that's something that we haven't solved yet. And I think the technology will probably only catch up maybe 18 months in order to provide that kind of like really good UX. And then in terms of like trading, I think NFTs offer a DEX makes money from volume, and NFTs obviously have volume. So I do think there's a market. I mean, you could probably get into a whole debate about what NFTs are, what kind of market verticals they go and where we think they're going to go. But, ultimately people aren't buying NFTs purely like, they're not buying them only for the art, right? There's definitely some financial speculation there.
How dare you?
Like,
my collection of Bored Apes is just because they look so pretty on my wall. I don't have any Bored Apes. I don't have any Bored Apes. I literally, when they came out, my friend messaged them to me and was like, "Hey man, like these are like, as in they hadn't dropped yet. They're like, oh, I got a tip. You should probably buy some of these." And I went to the website. And I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool. It looks like the artwork will be pretty cool." And then I looked at the price. And I can't remember how much they were. But they weren't cheap. They were like $500 or something like that. And I was like, nah, that seems a bit much. And I remember when when the Ether Rocks came out as well. Someone else sent me the Ether Rocks. Man, I should have just bought everything. Like, I think the truth is that each cycle, when a new thing comes along, if someone sends it to you, just buy it. It just doesn't matter. Just buy it.
In a bull market, like it's worth taking a few pence, right?
Right, but it wasn't a bull market yet, right? When the Bored Apes came out, it wasn't yet yet like clear. Like I think there was some starting around NFTs. Like people were starting to get a bit excited about them, and I know that CryptoPunks were coming back around, but obviously CryptoPunks had come out in 2015. But what's really interesting is some stuff didn't. Like, why did CryptoKitties not move at all? Like as one of the early ones. So like, but no, I'm 100% behind you. Like, it's not just about the art, right? It's about it's an asset. It's an asset class that both allows you to flex and potentially has some collateral value within DeFi. And as a result of those two things, it's sort of pretty interesting.
And probably some tax benefits, I'd imagine, if you played it right.
Maybe. Like honestly, most of the retail buyers who are buying this are not like super sophisticated, people with like complex wealth advice. Like they are, they're with all respect to the 20 somethings or the teenagers who got into NFTs and made a huge amount of money. Well done, guys. They are not super sophisticated people who are sitting there going, well, like if I structure this against my 401k and offset that against my, philanthropy, then I'll be able to offset this tax on the basis. No, they're not doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So like maybe some tax, like there is certainly ways in which you can structure your taxes efficiently with art, which for me, I think is very much in the morally gray area, but like, I don't think that's what caused the majority of the value increase here. So can you trade NFTs on Pangolin now?
No, so the thing is, like, ultimately, what we're doing is we're moving into what we call like DeFi-As-A-Service. So what we're doing, we've componentized like everything on the DEX, and one of our future plans, a bit of alpha, we haven't really released this publicly, is we want to provide like an NFT aggregator that then allows embed. So let's say, for example, you go to Sotheby's, right? And then what you can do is you can say, okay, Pangolin's got this widget. Sotheby's, when they're integrated into their website, they choose which collections they want to show. So let's say, for example, they only want the Bored Apes, or like the kind of premium collections. And then what that will happen is that widget will then direct to the best marketplace for them to get it, aggregate it, and then we'll just take like a little cut on top for providing the widget. So this is like one of our key things is like, okay, so everyone's so obsessed with fighting for the existing market share. And it seems very few people are looking like, how do we get like outside the market share? And like, that's what we're trying to do. We're going, okay, well, how do we approach like Web2 customers or traditional businesses and say, hey, you've heard about this crypto thing? Well, here's 2 or 3 lines of code. You can now offer it to your customers too. And that's kind of like how we hoping that we can bring, more adoption.
Okay. And how do you guys think about, it's a touchy subject. So like I think it's one that sort of, we need to start thinking about as an industry is how do you guys think about regulation specifically with things like, sort of MiCA and FATF and stuff like that coming down the pipe?
Yeah. I think, it's a hard question because each jurisdiction is dealing with it slightly differently.
Right.
I mean, what we've noticed is, rightly or wrongly, when like Ethereum started it, right? Like if you read like the Infinite Machine and all of that, they like sat down and they brainstormed like, how do we structure ETH, so it's not a security or whatever. And then they came up with this gas token, which was genius, by the way, and then like, I think governance tokens are a further thing. But what happens is as regulators kind of hit that mole, that whack-a-mole, what happens is the work required to create a token that's not classified as a security at some point will be equivalent to the work required to just list a security.
Yeah.
And the problem with governance tokens is, or in most of these tokens, is you're trying so hard to avoid regulators that you strip in them of any decent financial characteristics so that they become truly shitcoins.
Yep.
And what you want your user, I mean, again, not financial advice, and I don't know whatever disclaimers I need to put in here so my lawyers don't shout at me after this, but like you want a token to have decent financial characteristics because you want your users to share in the profits. You want them to, and you want to be fair to them.
Yep.
So as soon as you start stripping that away, it becomes, so then the thing is you go, okay, well, so, but there's no pathway to a decent token. So like for us,
Right.
for example, we want to give our users this, but the thing is, it's like, we also don't want the SEC coming after us, and I would prefer not to be arrested in some weird Dutch town, you know. Right. So how do we do it? And until regulators actually give us a pathway, everyone's just going to do what they've done. So the regulators need to, you know.
I'm 100% behind you. I think one of the most interesting problems that is coming down the path that that is not really discussed is like viable venues for exchange for securities, right? Because for security tokens specifically, because a lot of the reason that there's a lot of work in creating a security is not just the registration process and not just the disclosure process, but also where you can then actually trade that token. And the reason that, you know, all exchanges are all very, very keen on making sure, as in all centralized exchanges, are all very keen that they don't have any tokens that have the characteristics of securities on them, is because as soon as they fall into securities regulation, they are not regulated securities exchanges, and therefore you can't trade securities on them. And if you do want to fall within the purview of securities regulation, then the amount of sort of like administration and bureaucracy that's necessary just to be able to list a security on that exchange it becomes much, much higher. So I think that a lot of it comes down to friction and jurisdictional challenges, which is a lot of what decentralized finance was created to get it, like to try and reduce in the first place. So I do think it is interesting, and like purely from a cost point of view, in many ways that figure has already been surpassed. Like from recent conversations that I've had with teams that are considering of issuing tokens now in various guises, the amount of money that you have to spend on lawyers to get to the point where you have an opinion saying this is not a security is as high, if not higher, than just going the route of being like, this is a normal security. In fact, that's actually a better trodden path, because at least you're defining what it means to be a security. But as soon as you do that, you've basically cut yourself off from all venues for exchange, which means that you don't have liquidity in that token or that security. And so that's for me is the where I see the big essentially dilemma of the crypto space. Now, obviously, places like it's not 0x. There's another. There's been a couple of exchanges that have specifically sprung up as registered securities exchanges. I'm sure that Coinbase is going to create a registered securities exchange, and you're going to see other companies like sort of horizontally scaling out to that, like Robinhood and stuff like that. I'm sure that, you know, when there is an opportunity, that will happen. But you're right, within decentralized finance and within decentralized exchanging, that viable venue or like legitimate venue for exchange of securities, that's the key for me, is when that when legislation works its way through, that means that can actually happen. And that you're right, a lot of it is this stripping away of anything that would make the token actually interesting to people. And I don't think it's viable, right? Like, because the early tokens that happened in DeFi very much were, you know, shares in profits, you know, like even Uniswap's token, there is this ability to add a fee for the token to start taking a fee from the use of the platform. It hasn't been turned on, and I'm sure part of the reason for that is associated with regulatory concerns. So there is a big hole here. I think that there is going to be a lot of interesting work that happens over the next 3 to 5 years. But I think one of the big problems is no one really yet can put a finger on what they would want the legislation to look like. Like, if I handed a pencil to you today and said, go draft the legislation you want, you can say whatever you want. What do you want it to say? You'd struggle to work out exactly how it would look. I don't know. Do you think you could do that?
Well, isn't this your standard? I mean, this is the beautiful thing about composability. So the thing is, for me, is like, you know, surely there could be an ERC20 that is like expanded upon to be regulatory compliant. So, first of all, you'd make sure that there's no rug pull functions, right? So like you'd have all of these things built in, and it would be a standard, because ultimately what happens is if it's some legal manifesto off chain, it needs to be integrated or implemented on chain. So it makes sense to be like a token standard. And this token standard represents what this quasi security looks like. And then, it might be iterated upon over time. But now, okay, look, we're trying here, like help us out here,
I mean, like Polymath raised $130 million on that, what you just described. It hasn't really gone anywhere, because it's not just the token, right? It's the framework, and the problem is multifaceted, because every single token, the same that happens with an exchange, is every single token has to be compliant about what the token, what everything that is not in code is described of the token. So like there's the token as it's described in code, but in many ways that's like saying, equity, right? Equity is described in a very simple terms as to what is the number of shareholders that belong to a company in a particular jurisdiction. But if you then look at, shareholders agreements, or you look at the articles of association, or you look at like the contracts that they have with multiple other suppliers, that in aggregate actually describes what the equity means. It doesn't just, the equity isn't just equity on its own. And then if you want to list equity on a stock market, you have to go through this process of disclosure to get to the point where you are viable for actually being listed. And it's more than just, is there equity? The extra instrument isn't the only part. It's also the disclosures about the company. It's the auditing. It's all of this stuff. So it gets really complicated. And I think that DeFi just needs to start working out how it's going to actually put its arms around this complexity. And you're right, we're reaching this point, and it's the first step along the way, where the cost of doing it in a way that is it falls outside of the regulation is now more expensive than doing it narrowly within the way that it falls within the regulation. But then there's a bunch more maturity that then needs to come in, and it's going to be a hard journey. It's going to be a hard journey, but it's necessary. We can't rethink an industry without actually being able to work within the parameters of what like defines the fabric of how finance is done in the first place. Now, there's maybe some points where we go, that we can get rid of that. That's not necessary. I mean, like a good example of this is transfer agents in the US. Like complete anathema, unnecessary. You don't need them, right? Because you can do it with a smart contract. Escrow agents, don't need them. You can do it with a smart contract, right? Lawyers, you're probably still going to need lawyers, unfortunately. Accountants, probably still going to need accountants, unfortunately, right? Like, and we've gone down a weird tangent. I'm sorry.
But do you not think it's the hubris of our industry? Everyone thinks they're gigabrains, and they think that they can just forget everything in the past, and we can reinvent everything from scratch. Yep. It's like this, whereas like there's plenty of good stuff in the past. Like let's take the good stuff and let's not reinvent everything.
Oh, I have this rant all of the time. I'm literally like, people are like, we're going to start doing governance. It's like, yeah, but governance existed before crypto. And like, people are like, oh yeah, but like, you don't really have governance in companies. And you're like, yes, you do. Like, yes, you do. That's what like shareholders and directors and executives and like the separation between those. And by the way, when you incorporate a company, most people think I just incorporate a company. It's like, no, you also have all of the legislation that defines all of the rules about how you behave as a director and how you behave and what the rights of a shareholder is and all of this kind of stuff that we've spent 200 years, iterating through mistakes for. And like the Companies Act 2008, 2006 in the UK, which is the most modern legislation of its type, is literally like Bible level thickness of like the rules and regulations about how people should operate. And all of that is built around mistakes that have been made. Like, look at this time that directors screwed over shareholders. Look at this time that majority shareholders screwed over minority shareholders. Look at this time that blah, 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 blah. And you get a set of rules that has matured over very many. But the other thing, and this is key, right? Like, it also defines where the roles and responsibilities stop. Like, shareholders do not have the right to directly tell the executives what to do in a company. Directors do not have the right to directly go and run the company. Like, you have this separation. You go, the executive is given the mandate by the directors. The directors are reporting to the are responsible for representing the shareholders, but it's just not like the shareholders get to vote on every single decision at all. And we're reinventing all of this stuff because we went from the joint stock corporation back, when it first got created, and this idea of shareholders voting on everything, to now what we have, which is shareholders barely vote on anything. And you have this multi-layer approach to governance and accountability and responsibility that, has built up pretty well within the corporate space.
Mm.
So, like, one of the things I think that is really hard about being a founder in the DeFi space is this element of continuous engagement with the community and the way that the community wants to have a say in basically everything. I can imagine that for you guys that's been particularly acute because you started essentially as a fair launch project, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people don't see what goes on behind the scenes, right? So, like, it's very easy to have an opinion on things when you've never built software, or you've never built a company, or you've never built, these things. And a lot of that stuff's not public, right? So, like, when we took over, the core team took a pay cut to come over, and then we were working because there was no token allocation, and we were working like 80-hour weeks.
Right.
I had a newborn kid about 3 weeks after we took over. There's all this crazy stuff that happens, and there's this constant barrage, right? So that's the thing, like, especially when you're trying to do things the right way, it's very like in hindsight, being a non, everyone always goes, a non, it's dodgy and that's crypto. And but me being a public, well-known figure, and I look back and I'm like, dude, being a non would have been pretty damn nice. Because people know you, and then they come after you, and it's dudes came out and they were talking about my missus and saying I won't even repeat it here, and people it gets really personal, and because you can understand it because there's money involved, right? So that's as personal as it gets to most people, right? But it can be a pretty hard journey. Also, the thing is the innovation's so quick, right? So the thing is, you have to be so aware of everything. You're in a bleeding edge industry. You're trying to navigate what is a scam, what is actually innovative, or what is some bullshit that sorry, am I loud? Sorry. What is some new protocol that everyone fee tokenomics, this is a rant that I go on, is it's everyone's talking about fee tokenomics, and it's I think it's I'm not a fan, but you're often fighting against the tide,
mm-hmm.
and that can be incredibly exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And so how have you dealt with, because I'm sure that must have an impact on mental health, right?
Mm.
So
yeah. For me personally, now it's a lot better than it was because we're a lot more kind of mature as an organization. But in that first 6 months, you kind of constantly on on this precipice, right? So you're constantly battling against mental breakdown, and then you kind of pull yourself back, right? So you're doing 80-hour weeks, and then you just you exhaust. I remember I'd have to sleep because also the thing is time zones. So I was waking up at 5 a.m. so I'd be online for the US, and then I'd work straight through, so I'd be online again for Europe. So you're doing these like crazy hours at like weird times, and you just can't like. Like I remember specific conversations where like I was sitting with my wife, and you kind of sitting there, and like your hands kind of going like this, and you're like, okay, I think this is it. And then like, you know, pulling yourself back, and then like, then maybe you buy yourself another few weeks, you know, you kind of recover. And then like in 2 weeks time, you're like, okay, like, so it's like you're constantly pushing yourself to that edge, you know, and then like pulling yourself back.
So like, what have you done to create space for yourself? And what would you advise, I suppose, your starting self and anyone else thinking about stepping into a project or sort of getting involved in sort of actually helping to build a project? What would you advise to them?
I mean, there's probably two critical pieces. The first one is, in the beginning, you need generalists, you know, so you're going to have a small team. So you need people that are kind of quick thinking, able to kind of be sufficient or at least competent in multiple areas or disciplines. But then as you get a bit bigger, you need to hire specialists. So the famous, you know, saying is, you know, in the beginning, generalists, but as you scale, get specialists. And then it's surrounding yourself with excellent people. So we went through a lot of people. So like what happens in DeFi is, you know, when we were coming through, you know, like people were coming and, you know, I don't know if you've seen the Ragnarok dude. The guy was like, oh, I paid myself 1.85 million and I'm underpaid. Like, and that's the mentality of some of these people, man. So like we went through a lot of like overpriced devs, and like I had a simple rule, like if I can code better than you, like you're not good enough to be on the team. Simple. And like we're lucky, like so the thing is we were ruthless, right? So the thing is, if you didn't make it, you got chopped. But like we kept our standards. And now the thing is, you know, like everyone on the team contributes to a very high level. We trust each other. You have to surround yourself with excellence, and also like it's a good culture, right? Like if you surround yourselves with toxic people, or, you know, people that are like attracted to you because maybe you're out there bashing other people, or if you're surrounding yourselves with these people that are drawn to you because, you know, maybe you're attracting a certain element or you're portraying that energy, like those people ain't going to be with you when like you know, times are tough, right? So character is key.
Yep. In all things, I think that character is key in all things, but character is definitely key in how you hire. But for yourself, for you personally, what do you give as advice to founders and leaders of organizations in the DeFi space to help manage the sort of the stress that can occur in building this? Because it sounds like you've had some pretty horrific experiences. Like what do you do to like help manage that for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like for me personally, it's like what am I doing this for, right? So like I'm doing this for my family. Like obviously I love it. I mean, like the thing is, I wouldn't get into DeFi if you don't love it. Like if when you're on a train and you have a choice between watching Netflix or reading a light paper or white paper, and you choose a white paper, that's kind of a good hint you're in the right game. But if you're like, oh, maybe I'm watching Game of Thrones, or I can't get off my phone because I'm obsessed with understanding how this thing works, and like I just want to, you know, if you're just here to make money, you're probably going to get like thrown out. Again, it depends. There's a difference between a builder, traders, and investors, right? Like if you want to be a builder, like you've got to love it. Otherwise, like you'll get thrown out.
Yeah, I mean that's really key, especially to get through the hard times. And the thing is that where's the most value come? It comes during the bear cycles. It comes from, you know, when the industry gets a bit quiet and people go away, and it becomes a time where you're there because you see the fundamental value in it, and you continue to build because you see the fundamental value in it. But I think that for me personally, there's also a huge amount of importance in like taking breaks even if it's just a few hours, but being very strict at going, like between this time and this time, I'm not looking at my phone, I'm stepping away, I'm taking a break, going for walks, like making sure you get out of the house, making sure that you spend some time doing that, like that you do exercise and that you get sleep. Like for me, the difference between having sleep and not having sleep in my motivation and like how I feel just facing the computer, like facing my task list, facing my backlog, like the difference in having had enough sleep or not having enough sleep and like how exhausted I am just makes all the difference to my level of motivation as well. But the last thing is like, ultimately, your decisions are there is a community and then there is the team that is building. And it can be very difficult to forget the separation between the two. But ultimately, you're in the driving seat. And if you're in the driving seat, trust your decisions. Like, go and talk to the community, get feedback. But ultimately, you're the person who sees the most in everything that you're doing. You're doing it every single day. You're talking with experts in the field. You're spending time doing research. You've thought these things through more deeply than most people have. Like, trust yourself. Like, have some faith in what your decisions are, because you're never going to make everyone happy. It's important that you make high integrity decisions, that you don't just sit in a room and make something up. But if you know that you've gone and gotten feedback and you've spoken with people, then like believe in those decisions and double down on them, because you don't progress otherwise. You will just continually find yourself at the whims of everyone coming in and bashing you at all sides, because you can never be right. You can't make everyone happy. Every single decision you make is going to make someone unhappy. Be okay with that is the biggest piece of advice I would ever give to anyone trying to build in the crypto space.
Like sometimes you just got to not care. Like, you know, the thing is, it's like, this is this journey that we're on. And like, if you want to come with, like, cool. But like, that's your choice, right? Like, yeah, and you've got to believe in it, right? And that's, what is that beautiful saying? It's like, you know, if you want to sail across the ocean, don't teach people how to build the boat. Teach them to yearn for the endless magic of the ocean, or, you know, and that's what you got to do, right? Like, you got to inspire those people to come with you.
I can't remember who said that. I feel like that's a really old quote, and I came across it recently. I can't remember what it is, but yeah, it's a great quote.
Amazing quote.
Justin, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. If people want to find out more about Pangolin, where should they go, and how should they get started?
Yeah, so crypto Twitter is probably like our primary kind of like a loudspeaker channel, I guess. Discord's pretty friendly. We've had a lot of activity there lately. Telegram, but like announcements will be on Twitter. Alpha will generally be on Twitter, but then like if you want to kind of just hang out, Discord's probably the best place.
Awesome. And yeah, looking forward to working with you guys, seeing you guys soon.
Definitely. I'm very much looking forward to it.
You better call on these guys. I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline. Building the future, I feel like a savage.